Clara Bennett was a troubled patient. Dr. Harold Whitman was a respected psychologist. Together, their lives would become entwined in a deadly experiment that shattered the boundaries of science and morality. What started as a quest for healing turned into a terrifying journey of control and a murder that would change psychology forever. Elmwood was the kind of town where everyone knew each other's names, where the streets were lined with old oak. Trees and children played safely until the sun dipped below the horizon. It was a place where people locked their doors more out of habit than fear, where neighbors borrowed sugar without hesitation and helped each other through hard times. Life moved slowly and predictably, and nothing much ever happened to disturb the peace. That peace was shattered one cold October evening when Clara Bennett's lifeless body was discovered in her small, cozy home at the edge of town. The news spread like wildfire, first whispered from neighbor to neighbor, then shouted on every street corner and splashed across every newspaper headline. No one could believe it. Clara was only 28, young and full of life, and she had always been a beloved member of the community. Clara had worked as a schoolteacher for the past 5 years, a role she took seriously and loved deeply. She was known for her warm smile and patient nature, qualities that made her popular with students and parents alike. The school hallways would often echo with laughter whenever Clara was near, and she had a knack for calming even the most restless children. In Elmwood, she was more than just a teacher. She was a friend, a confidant, and a symbol of kindness. Her death, then, felt like a betrayal of everything the town stood for. How could someone so gentle become the victim of such a brutal act? The police were called immediately after a neighbor, Mrs. Lawson, became worried when she noticed Clara's porch light hadn't been turned on that evening. When the officers arrived and found the front door unlocked, they stepped inside with growing dread. The scene inside Clara's home was chilling but puzzling. Her living room, though modest, was neat and orderly. No signs of a struggle or forced entry. The window curtains were drawn, and the soft light of a table lamp cast long shadows across the walls. Clara's body lay on the floor near the kitchen doorway. She had been struck multiple times, but there was no weapon nearby, no clue to the murderer's identity. What baffled investigators most was the absence of any clear motive. Nothing had been stolen, no valuables disturbed, and no signs that Clara had been involved in any arguments or dangerous relationships. Elmwood had never seen a crime like this, and the police felt the weight of an unsolved mystery pressing down on them. Detective Mark Reynolds was assigned to the case. He was a seasoned officer with a reputation for calm determination, someone who had solved many difficult cases in his career. But even Reynolds found himself struggling to make sense of what he saw that night. Clara's murder was not just a crime. It was a riddle wrapped in silence with no obvious answers. The first step was to search for any witnesses or clues that might point to the killer. The officers spoke with neighbors, but no one reported hearing unusual noises or seeing suspicious figures near Clara's house. People remembered her leaving the grocery store earlier that day, carrying a bag of groceries, smiling as usual. No one saw her enter the house with anyone else, and no one noticed anything unusual in her behavior. Despite the lack of physical evidence, something didn't sit right with Detective Reynolds. He sensed that beneath Clara's calm exterior, something had been troubling her. To those who knew her, Clara had always been steady and reliable. But was there something hidden? Something no one had noticed? The investigation began to reveal small, strange details. Clara's friends mentioned that she had seemed tired lately, distracted in ways that were unusual for her. One friend recalled that Clara had canceled plans at the last minute, saying she wasn't feeling well, but never explained why. Others said she seemed more withdrawn, avoiding conversations or looking over her shoulder as if afraid of being watched. None of these details added up to a clear motive, but they painted a picture of a woman who was quietly struggling. Was she hiding a secret? Was someone threatening her? Or was she simply overwhelmed by something she couldn't explain? As the days passed, the police combed through Clara's personal life. They searched her phone, her emails, and her social media accounts for clues. There were no angry messages, no hints of blackmail or threats. Her messages were typical of a young woman who loved her work, stayed close to family, and enjoyed spending quiet evenings at home. But then, a new piece of information surfaced. One that shifted the investigation in an unexpected direction. Clara had been visiting a psychologist in secret for several months. The name was Dr. Harold Whitman, a well-known figure in the town, respected for his expertise and his calm manner. No one knew the full reason for Clara's visits, and her family seemed unaware of this detail. Detective Reynolds decided to learn more about these appointments. Was Clara seeing Dr. Whitman because she was dealing with something serious? Could her sessions have uncovered something dangerous? Dr. Whitman's office was quiet and professional, filled with books and soft lighting that gave it a peaceful atmosphere. According to his records, Clara had started therapy about 6 months before her death. The psychologist's notes hinted at growing anxiety and fear, but there was no clear explanation. Clara had described feeling like her thoughts weren't her own, as if someone else was influencing her mind. She talked about strange experiences, moments when she couldn't remember what she had done, or where her thoughts seemed to be controlled by an invisible force. The idea seemed almost unbelievable, like the plot of a thriller movie. But these were Clara's own words, recorded carefully by Dr. Whitman. The more Detective Reynolds learned, the more he realized that this case was unlike any other he had faced. Clara Bennett's murder was not just a violent act. It was the beginning of a story that would expose the hidden, fragile world of the human mind. It raised questions about how much control we truly have over ourselves, and how far science could go in manipulating the brain. Elmwood's quiet streets held a terrible secret, and the murder of a beloved teacher was only the first chapter in a story that would change everything. The discovery of Clara Bennett's secret visits to Dr. Harold Whitman sent a ripple of shock through the investigation. The town of Elmwood had trusted Dr. Whitman as a calm, caring professional. He was known for helping people overcome their fears and anxieties. But now, the police wondered if his connection to Clara held the key to the mystery, or perhaps something darker. Detective Mark Reynolds knew that understanding Clara's last days was crucial. The strange details about her behavior, the fear she seemed to carry, and the sense that her thoughts were no longer her own, all pointed to something unusual, something beyond a simple crime of passion or robbery. The psychologist's office became the center of attention. Dr. Whitman had built a reputation for working on the cutting edge of psychology. He specialized in exploring the mind's hidden corners, particularly in cases of trauma and deep anxiety. His methods were unconventional, sometimes pushing the limits of traditional therapy. This raised new questions. Could Clara's fear and confusion have been the result of treatment rather than the cause of it? When Detective Reynolds examined Dr. Whitman's records, he found detailed notes from their sessions. Clara had described feeling like a stranger inside her own mind, as if her thoughts and actions were controlled by a force she couldn't resist. She reported sudden blackouts and memories that didn't seem to belong to her. The psychologist wrote that Clara's condition was worsening. She was slipping deeper into a mental fog, unsure of what was real and what was imagined. At first, these symptoms seemed to suggest a severe psychological disorder, perhaps triggered by stress or trauma. But as the detective looked closer, he realized that Clara's case was unlike anything he had encountered. The confusion, the memory loss, and the terrifying sense of losing control pointed to something more mysterious. The town of Elmwood began to whisper about the possibility that Clara had been involved in something beyond normal therapy. Some speculated about secret experiments, others about manipulation or mind control. These rumors felt like the plot of a thriller novel, but Detective Reynolds knew that reality could sometimes be stranger than fiction. As the police dug deeper, they learned more about Dr. Whitman's work. He had been conducting research into the human mind's ability to be influenced without awareness. His studies involved hypnosis, suggestion, and other psychological techniques designed to change behavior subtly. While most of his work was accepted, by the medical community, some colleagues had warned that his methods were untested and risky. According to sources close to Dr. Whitman, he believed that the mind could be programmed like a computer, rewired to react and respond in specific ways. This was a controversial idea, one that frightened many experts in the field. The thought that someone could control another person's thoughts and actions was chilling. Detective Reynolds found out that Clara had been one of Dr. Whitman's most involved patients in this experimental approach. She had been part of a series of sessions meant to explore the limits of suggestion and subconscious influence. At first, the sessions appeared to be standard therapy, but gradually, they took on a more intense and unusual tone. Clara's journal, discovered among her personal belongings, provided more clues. She had written about feeling trapped inside, her own mind confused by sudden mood changes and strange urges she couldn't explain. In one entry, she described a session where she felt as if she were split in two, her thoughts clashing in an internal battle she couldn't control. This discovery sent a shiver through Detective Reynolds. It was clear that Clara's mental state had deteriorated during her time with Dr. Whitman. But was the psychologist responsible for this decline? Or was Clara simply a victim of her own fragile mind? The investigation also revealed that Dr. Whitman rarely allowed others to observe his sessions. His office had no cameras, and he kept detailed but private notes. He believed that the mind's deepest secrets could only be unlocked in complete privacy. This secrecy only fueled suspicions. Despite his growing doubts, Detective Reynolds found no direct evidence that Dr. Whitman had harmed Clara. The psychologist cooperated with the investigation, but was evasive when questioned about the experiments. His calm demeanor made it difficult to tell whether he was hiding something or simply protecting his patient's confidentiality. The more the detective learned, the more he realized this case was not just about a murder. It was about the fragile boundary between the conscious and subconscious mind, about how far someone could be pushed before losing control. Experts called in to review Dr. Whitman's methods were divided. Some believed his work was groundbreaking and had potential to help millions. Others warned that tampering with the mind in such a way was dangerous and could lead to unpredictable consequences. The town was left with more questions than answers. Was Clara's murder the result of an experiment gone terribly wrong? Had she been driven to madness by the very treatment meant to heal her? Or was there something else, something darker, lurking beneath the surface? Rumors spread that Clara's Fear was caused by someone manipulating her thoughts, forcing her to live in a nightmare she couldn't escape. Others believed she had uncovered a secret that threatened powerful people and paid the ultimate price. Detective Reynolds refused to jump to conclusions. He knew that the truth was buried deep in the complex workings of the human brain. What seemed impossible, mind control, manipulation, loss of self, was suddenly at the heart of his investigation. Elmwood watched closely as the case unfolded. The murder of Clara Bennett was no longer just a tragic crime. It was becoming a symbol of the dangers hidden within the study of the mind. The story captured the attention of psychologists, scientists, and the general public alike. The quiet town had become the stage for a chilling mystery, one that raised uncomfortable questions about free will, the power of suggestion, and the dark side of human psychology. It was a puzzle with pieces scattered across the fragile borders of reality and illusion. As the investigation moved forward, Detective Reynolds prepared for the difficult task ahead. He needed to unravel the secrets of Clara's final days and understand what role, if any, Dr. Whitman's experiments played in her death. The answers, he suspected, would challenge everything people thought they knew about the mind and human behavior. As Detective Reynolds dug deeper into the connection between Clara Bennett and Dr. Harold Whitman, a disturbing truth began to emerge. Whitman wasn't just a psychologist treating patients in a traditional way. He had been conducting secret experiments, pushing the boundaries of what was considered safe and ethical in psychology. His work wasn't just about helping people heal. It was about controlling the human mind. Whitman's research focused on hypnosis and suggestion, but in ways far more intense than usual therapy sessions. He believed he could program a person's thoughts and actions, much like a computer. The idea was that by reaching into the subconscious mind, he could influence behavior without the subject even realizing it. This was not science fiction. It was real, and it had been happening in the quiet town of Elmwood. What made this revelation so chilling was that Clara Bennett had been one of Whitman's test subjects. The sessions that began as therapy had evolved into a series of experiments designed to explore the limits of mind control. Clara was told little about the true purpose. She thought she was receiving help, but instead, she was part of something far darker. According to the records found in Whitman's office, the psychologist had used a combination of deep hypnosis, audio suggestion, and visual triggers to implant commands in Clara's subconscious. The goal was to see if he could make her perform actions without her conscious awareness. It was a radical experiment that had never been attempted on someone outside a lab. Clara's journal painted a terrifying picture. She wrote about feeling trapped inside her own head, as if there were two versions of herself, one who was aware and frightened, and another who obeyed commands she didn't understand. She described waking up with no memory of where she had been or what she had done. The confusion and fear grew until she felt like a prisoner in her own mind. Detective Reynolds realized that this wasn't just a case of mental illness or emotional trauma. It was something far more sinister, the manipulation of a human being at the deepest level. Elmwood was stunned when news of Whitman's experiments leaked. The community that once trusted him now questioned how someone could use his skills to invade the mind so completely. What was the purpose of these experiments? And who was responsible for overseeing such dangerous work? As the investigation progressed, it became clear that Whitman had been working alone. There were no official approvals, no ethical boards, no safeguards. His experiments were kept secret, hidden behind closed doors and confidential patient records. The psychologist believed he was pushing the boundaries of science for the greater good, but the results showed a devastating lack of control. The most shocking discovery came when Reynolds found evidence that Clara's murder might have been linked directly to these experiments. The police uncovered recordings from some of the sessions, audio files where Clara was given commands under hypnosis. Some of the commands were harmless, but others were darker, telling her to hide, to avoid people, and in some cases, to act without thinking. The question that haunted Reynolds was whether Clara's death was the result of these implanted commands, or if she had resisted and fought back against Whitman's control. Had she tried to escape the experiment? And was that why she was killed? Or was she herself the unwilling weapon, forced to do something terrible while under the psychologist's influence? The lines blurred between victim and perpetrator, between control and free will. It was a case unlike any other, one that forced the police to consider psychological manipulation as a motive. As the story spread beyond Elmwood, experts weighed in. Psychologists warned that Whitman's experiments were dangerously close to playing God. The human mind, they said, was too complex and fragile to be programmed without devastating consequences. Hypnosis and suggestion were tools meant to help, not control. The legal system also struggled with the implications. How could the law hold someone accountable if their actions were controlled by another's commands? And if a psychologist was responsible for such control, what punishment was appropriate? The media dubbed the case the mind control murder, a sensational label that captured public imagination. People were fascinated and terrified by the idea that someone's thoughts could be taken over, their will erased. For Detective Reynolds, the case became an obsession. He reviewed every piece of evidence, trying to understand the relationship between Clara and Whitman. The more he learned, the more he realized that the psychologist's experiments had spiraled out of control, with tragic consequences. Whitman himself showed signs of strain. As pressure mounted, his behavior became erratic. He insisted his work was misunderstood, that he was a pioneer trying to help people. But privately, some reported that he seemed haunted by guilt, and at times confused about what was real and what was not. One startling revelation was that Whitman may have begun to lose control of his own mind. Some of the recordings showed him speaking to himself, giving commands under hypnosis. It was as if the experiment had turned inward, affecting the man who created it. This twist deepened the mystery. If Whitman was losing his grip on reality, could Clara's murder be the result of a breakdown, his mind and hers collapsing under the weight of manipulation? The detective uncovered fragments of a hidden journal written by Whitman himself, where he described his fascination with controlling the mind, but also his fears. He admitted that the experiments were dangerous, but he felt trapped by his own ambition. The psychologist's notes spoke of voices and shadows that he couldn't control, signs that the experiment was unraveling. Elmwood's peaceful streets now held a dark secret. A psychologist's dangerous quest to master the mind had ended in tragedy. Clara Bennett was the victim, but the real story was about the fragile boundary between control and chaos. The case forced society to confront difficult questions. How far could science go in exploring the mind without risking harm? What protections were necessary to prevent abuse? And most chilling of all, how much of what we think is truly our own? The murder that began as a simple crime had evolved into a complex battle for control over the human psyche. Detective Reynolds knew that solving it required more than just traditional police work. It needed a deep understanding of the mind's mysteries. As the investigation moved toward its climax, new evidence hinted that the full truth was even more disturbing than anyone had imagined. The murder was only the beginning of a story that would change the way people saw psychology forever. The deeper Detective Reynolds dug into the case, the more it became clear that Clara Bennett's death was not a simple act of violence, but part of something far more complex, a tangled web of psychological manipulation, secrecy, and betrayal. The experiment conducted by Dr. Harold Whitman had spiraled beyond control, and its consequences rippled far beyond what anyone had anticipated. One of the most troubling discoveries came when Reynolds found a hidden room in Whitman's office building. Behind a false wall, concealed beneath bookshelves and paintings, was a small laboratory filled with strange equipment. The room contained audio devices, hypnosis chairs, and computers running programs designed to analyze brain waves and control mental states. This secret lab revealed just how far Whitman had pushed his experiments. The equipment was unlike anything typically found in a psychologist's office. Some machines appeared to broadcast subliminal messages, while others monitored physical responses like heart rate and brain activity. Reynolds realized that Clara, and possibly other patients, had been subjected to intense sessions that blended science and mind control technology. Records on the computers showed detailed logs of each session, including notes on Clara's responses to specific stimuli and commands. Whitman had meticulously documented the effects of his programming, recording every shift in her mental state. The logs suggested that the psychologist had been trying to implant multiple layers of control, some of which Clara seemed to resist. But the resistance had a cost. Clara's journal revealed that she fought to hold on to her identity even as the commands inside her mind grew stronger. The battle within her was painful and terrifying, with moments of clarity followed by blackouts and confusion. She wrote about waking up in strange places with no memory of how she got there, a sign that the implanted commands were sometimes taking control without her knowledge. Detective Reynolds became convinced that Clara's murder was connected to this internal struggle. She had been fighting against Whitman's control, and in doing so, had become a threat to him. The psychologist's ambition to control minds had created a dangerous situation where the subject could no longer distinguish between reality and manipulation. More unsettling was the discovery that Clara was not the only one involved. The investigation revealed that Whitman had a secret network of patients, all subjected to varying degrees of psychological experiments. Some had disappeared without explanation. Others suffered mental breakdowns or erratic behavior. The police found reports from former patients who described experiences similar to Clara's: memory loss, unexplained actions, and a haunting sense of losing control. These accounts painted a picture of Whitman as a man who had crossed ethical lines, experimenting on vulnerable people for the sake of his research. What shocked the community most was the realization that some of these patients were prominent figures in Elmwood. People who appeared normal in public were struggling with hidden horrors. It raised the question, how many had been affected, and how many were still trapped under Whitman's influence? As the investigation progressed, tensions grew between the police and the medical community. Some professionals defended Whitman's work, claiming it had potential benefits if carefully controlled. Others called for stricter regulations and a full review of psychological practices. The debate over mind control and free will exploded into the public sphere, with heated arguments about science, ethics, and responsibility. Detective Reynolds faced pressure to close the case quickly. but he refused to settle for easy answers. He knew the truth was more complicated than anyone wanted to admit. Whitman's experiments challenged the very foundation of psychology. If a mind could be controlled without awareness, what did that mean for justice, morality, and personal freedom? The investigation took another unexpected turn when new evidence suggested that Clara's murder might have been assisted by someone else. Forensic analysis of the crime scene revealed faint traces of chemicals that could induce unconsciousness or manipulate brain activity. These substances were rare and difficult to obtain, pointing to a possible accomplice with access to specialized resources. Detective Reynolds began to suspect that Whitman did not act alone. There might have been a hidden group, scientists, financiers, or shadowy figures, who supported his experiments and had a vested interest in the results. This raised the stakes dramatically. The case was no longer just about a psychologist gone rogue. It was about a larger conspiracy. The detectives' efforts to identify this group were met with silence and stonewalling. Contacts within the scientific community were reluctant to speak, and some witnesses disappeared or refused to cooperate. It was as if an invisible hand was protecting those involved, hiding the truth behind layers of secrecy. Despite the obstacles, Reynolds found an unlikely ally in Dr. Amelia Carter, a young neuroscientist who had become alarmed by Whitman's work. She explained the dangers of tampering with the subconscious and offered to help interpret the complex data recovered from the secret lab. Dr. Carter's expertise shed new light on the psychological techniques used in the experiments. She revealed how subtle suggestions, repeated over time, could rewrite thoughts and behaviors without the subject's conscious knowledge. This process, known as covert conditioning, was powerful but extremely risky. According to Dr. Carter, Whitman's work had pushed covert conditioning to its limits, creating unpredictable effects. Clara's dissociative episodes were signs that the implanted commands conflicted with her natural personality, causing her mind to fracture. This explained the blackouts, memory loss, and sudden mood changes. The neuroscientist warned that such manipulation could permanently damage the brain's ability to function normally. The risk of psychosis, memory loss, and even violent behavior was high when the mind was forced into unnatural patterns. Detective Reynolds realized that Clara's death might have been the tragic result of a mind pushed beyond repair. But he also knew that justice required uncovering who was responsible and ensuring it never happened again. As the investigation reached a critical point, tensions in Elmwood grew. The community was divided between fear, anger, and disbelief. The story of Clara Bennett had exposed the dark side of psychological research and raised haunting questions about control, consent, and the limits of science. The case became a turning point for psychology as a field. It sparked widespread calls for reform, stricter regulations, and increased oversight of experimental treatments. The murder had not only shattered a life, but shaken the foundation of an entire profession. Detective Reynolds, exhausted but determined, prepared to face the final stages of the investigation. He knew the truth was buried deep in the shadows of the mind and the hidden corners of power. The answers he sought would challenge everything people believed about free will, responsibility, and the price of progress. The murder that had started. As a tragic crime had now become a story about the fragile balance between knowledge and ethics, between healing and harm. Elmwood would never be the same, and the legacy of Clara Bennett would haunt the field of psychology forever. As the investigation entered its final phase, Detective Reynolds felt the weight of the entire case pressing down on him. Clara Bennett's murder was more than just a crime. It was a mirror reflecting the dangers of unchecked power over the human mind. The deeper Reynolds probed, the more he realized the truth was a tangled web of ambition, ethics, and tragedy. One of the most important breakthroughs came when Reynolds uncovered a series of encrypted files hidden on Whitman's computers. Using advanced forensic techniques, the police cracked the encryption and revealed a treasure trove of data, detailed records of experiments, video recordings, and correspondences with unknown individuals. These files painted a clear picture of Whitman's activities, but also hinted at a larger, more secretive organization backing him. The communications suggested that Whitman had been working for a private research group interested in mind control technologies. This group was composed of wealthy investors and influential figures from outside Elmwood, all seeking to unlock the power to manipulate human behavior for profit and control. The lines between science and exploitation blurred in these messages. What shocked Reynolds most was the group's cold, calculating approach. They saw patients like Clara not as people, but as data points, subjects to be experimented on, their lives expendable if the results served the greater goal. This ruthless perspective explained why Whitman's experiments had escalated without oversight or concern for harm. The detectives' efforts to identify the members of this group led to roadblocks. Many of the financiers operated through shell companies, and key figures kept their identities well hidden. It became clear that exposing the full extent of the conspiracy would require more than just police work. It would demand a coordinated effort from journalists, lawmakers, and psychological experts. While Reynolds worked to bring these shadowy players to light, the emotional impact of the case weighed heavily on the town of Elmwood. The murder and the revelations about mind control shook the community's faith in science and trust in professionals sworn to help. People questioned how such a secret could exist right under their noses, hidden behind a veneer of respectability. Clara Bennett's family, devastated by her loss, became vocal advocates for reform. They demanded stricter regulations on psychological treatments and better protections for patients. Their pain turned into purpose, helping to push the case into the national spotlight. Psychological associations across the country responded by revisiting ethical guidelines. New laws were proposed to prevent experiments without informed consent and to increase transparency in mental health treatment. Clara's story became a powerful example of what could go wrong when science ignored human dignity. Detective Reynolds found unexpected support from the scientific community, especially from Dr. Amelia Carter. She helped translate complex psychological concepts into clear warnings for policymakers and the public. Together, they highlighted the dangers of covert conditioning and mind manipulation techniques, emphasizing the need for caution and care. Despite these efforts, some questions remained unanswered. Was Clara's murder truly the result of a loss of control caused by implanted commands? Or had Whitman, overwhelmed by guilt and fear, taken desperate measures to silence her before she could expose him? Evidence suggested both possibilities. Some recordings revealed Whitman's panic as Clara grew resistant, his voice trembling as he tried to regain control. Other files hinted at threats from the secretive group demanding results, pushing Whitman to dangerous extremes. In the end, Detective Reynolds believed the truth was a tragic combination of forces: ambition, manipulation, and fear spiraling out of control. Clara Bennett was caught in the middle of a cruel experiment where no one could fully predict the outcome. The final arrest shocked the town. Dr. Harold Whitman was charged with multiple crimes, including manslaughter, unlawful experimentation, and conspiracy. The secret organization, while never fully exposed, came under intense scrutiny, with investigations continuing on multiple fronts. During the trial, expert witnesses explained the psychological techniques used and their potential for harm. The court grappled with the complex issue of responsibility, how much blame lay with Whitman and how much with the shadowy backers. The verdict marked a turning point. Whitman was held accountable for the dangerous abuses of his position, and stricter regulations were enacted nationwide. The case became a landmark in psychology and criminal law, reminding the world that scientific progress must never come at the cost of human rights. As Elmwood began to heal, Detective Reynolds reflected on the lessons learned. The murder that changed psychology forever was a story of power wielded without limits, and the devastating cost when control is taken from the mind's rightful owner. Clara Bennett's legacy lived on, a somber reminder of the mind's fragility and the need for vigilance against those who would seek to control it. Her story inspired a generation of psychologists to prioritize ethics and humanity above ambition and secrecy. In quiet moments, Reynolds thought about the unseen battle that had raged inside Clara's mind, a fight for identity, freedom, and truth. It was a struggle many would never fully understand, but one that had changed the course of psychology and justice forever. The murder was solved, but its impact echoed far beyond the crime scene. It forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about the mind, control, and the delicate balance between science and morality. The story of Clara Bennett would be remembered not just as a tragedy, but as a catalyst for change, a warning etched into the history of human understanding.